Hey, hello everybody. This is Founder Laerun. I'm here with Lady Shel, and we are going to do Fantasy Grounds Presents Fantasy Grounds A through Z, Episode 10, Organizing Data and Setting Up Your Campaign. Hey, Lady Shel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I'm watching the commercial still. It's talking about Walmart.
Yay. So we're going to provide you with
Here
some
we
data,
go. Oh, nice. I like your
the overlay.
backdrop.
Yep. Okay, so we are going to be discussing how to set up a campaign. We're going to use our trusty standby Lost Mine of Fandelver. And we want to mainly point out and specify the Windows management and how to get set up for the campaign. This is probably one of the most important streams that you're going to come across in this series. I think all of them are important, but this one really hits home, and it also really makes life easier on you in Classic or in Unity. So if you're using Classic, this would also pertain to that for the most part. So how are you doing today, Lady Shel?
I'm doing fine. I was just typing a chat now. You always catch me at the wrong time. It's
Okay.
pretty good for Sunday. It's not too bad.
Okay, cool. All right, so basically I have a sort of a blank slate here. And when I say blank slate, there's really not a whole lot of optimization or any sort of customization, really. I do have in the library, I changed the banners on the right-hand side, and I changed it to all. That's the only thing I've done so far, and that gives you a view of all the different banners. Now, we teach this in our DM 101 class and in our character creation, but I wanted you to have a point of reference where I'm starting from. So if you have everything already set, you would probably click up here on the top left where it says GM mode. I don't know if it's like this for different rule sets, but this is what the 5th edition one does. And then all these on the right-hand side are Game Master view, which is mainly what we're going to be dealing with. One thing that we are going to add additionally is a specific map that's going to go to an encounter, and we'll add that towards the end of the show because it's not the standard map that comes with Fantasy Grounds. So we want to kind of give you an idea how that's done. But for the most part, everything I'm going to be loading here is part of either the 5th edition rule set or Fantasy Grounds or the module that comes with it, whatever we end up loading. So I'm going to go to the library, and right now I don't have anything loaded. No SRD, no basic rules, nothing. So if you are a new user and you don't own any content and you want to start game mastering, you will eventually want to get some of the books that we're showing you. But to start with, you can load up the SRD and you can buy Lost Mine of Fandelver, and it is basically self-contained. So you don't have to go out and buy everything at once. You can just basically take and build your library as you go. A lot of us are fortunate that we've been around for a few years, so we have a lot of content, tokens, maps, those sort of things. But just starting out, you just need a license and you need the SRD and you need a basic understanding of how Fantasy Grounds works. And then you can build your own content once you understand that stuff. And you should probably buy at least the Lost Mine of Fandelver just so you have an idea of how it's arranged and how it's set up. That module is pretty much self-contained. You really don't need a whole lot else to run it. It comes with pre-gens. It has its own monsters and treasure and maps and images. It's just something to get the game masters used to running games, and it gives you a rough idea of how the game should be flowed. Most modules don't give you that information, so that's what makes this one really, really great, is it actually breaks down the encounters and it tells you what's going on and how to run the encounters or how to set them up. And it even gives you tips on how to run the game. So most modules don't do that. They're just strictly, here's the module, here's the story, run with it. This one actually breaks all that down and then actually gives you encounter information. So I'll show a little bit of that as we go. All right, so first things first is we need to load content from the library. So when I open the library window, if you have any purchased content and you're connected to the store, or maybe you've downloaded some stuff from the DMs Guild, you have to put the third-party stuff in your folder that's labeled modules on the back end of Fantasy Grounds. And if you have a purchase from the store or Steam, wherever you purchased from, your items will be pulled into Fantasy Grounds store, and when you update the client, it will pull in your content. So that would be what you'd want to look for first. Then once you have your content loaded or available, now we're going to activate them for use in this campaign. Each campaign is unique. They're not all connected together. So we would call this a session. And I'm going to go ahead and do a search here, and I'm going to look for Lost Mine. And there it is. There's a Lost Mine of Phandelver. And once I click load, it will show up in the library. Now the next thing I'm going to load is the player's handbook. Now again, if you don't have the core rules, you can load the SRD, which is the system reference document. That will get you started. But this module is a lot more complete, and it's better to have the player's handbook if you plan on building characters. If you don't care and you just want to try, you can use the pre-gens that come with Lost Mine. So I'm searching for player in the search field on the bottom left. And I should be able to pull up the player's handbook, in which there's a lot of different things titled similarly. But if you look through here, I have a lot of different content that has a player side. So quite often, Fantasy Grounds will have a DM side and a player side. So when you're loading content, you want to load the correct material. In this case, Lost Mine is sort of self-contained. It doesn't have two parts, but there are other modules that do. And in this case, I'm not going to load any other modules other than the player's handbook. I think that book is probably the most essential. If you have that book, you can pretty much do whatever you want with Fantasy Grounds. Within reason, of course. Sometimes you'll notice a little hesitation when you load modules. Just be patient. It's actually coursing through your library and the content. So when you load modules, just give it a second to load. A lot of people start clicking all over the place and they panic, and they'll cause Fantasy Grounds to crash. That's still a thing. It's not as bad as it is from Classic to Unity, but there's still that potential. So if you have a bunch of content, you will have a little bit of lag. You just have to be a little patient. So this D&D Player's Handbook is now loaded, and I have an adventure. So once I have those loaded, you come down here and you can look at the different types of data that's available in each module. So this one has a pre-gens area, it has encounters, it has NPCs, parcels, and a reference manual. So the reference manual, if you click on that link, this will take you to the actual book or the actual content that comes with it. Now, not everything has a reference manual, especially third-party stuff. But if you buy official content, most likely it'll have some sort of reference manual. So you have this chapter 1, and you can go through this just like you would a book. So if you're playing around the table and you want to actually show this content as you would, playing books and dice and pencils and paper, you could totally load this on a laptop and use this as your reference, just like you would a regular game. This is just a handy way of carrying around all your books instead of a big briefcase full of 100 pounds of actual printed books. So you could use Fantasy Grounds just like a tool instead of a virtual tabletop. So if you want to do it that way and maybe throw it up on your widescreen and play around the table at home, you can do that as well. There's ways that you can integrate it. I'm not going to go over that, but you can have dice rollers turned off to where you can take the physical results and enter that. So those are just some options that you have with Fantasy Grounds. But right now we got this library up, and I have the Lost Mine of Phandelver reference manual, and these are all the different chapters. You can search down here on the bottom left. The direction arrows on the bottom center here are to change the pages, just like you would in a regular book. If you wanted to bookmark something, like let's say you want to start at the cave mouth, you can actually pop that page out, and on the top left corner of this page where it says cave mouth, there's a round circle that looks like a shield. In other rule sets, it might be a dragon or a skull or whatever it is, but it'll be in the top left corner. It's a link. So if I take and drag and drop this down to the hotkeys, I will have that available to me. So if I accidentally close the reference manual or I don't want it taking up space, I can go back to the link. And there's the link that I bookmarked. So that would be like if you wanted to research something, you read halfway through it, and you go, I'll come back to it. You can link it there and have a nice shortcut so you don't have to go digging at it again. So here, I also have the player's handbook, and here are all the different links here. And again, it has its own reference manual. So these are the main two books that I would recommend getting at first. If you can't afford the player's handbook, then get the Lost Mine of Phandelver and then just use the built-in SRD, which is the system reference document. That is what the entire rule set is based on, and it's also based on the Fantasy Grounds core functions, which is all the Fantasy Grounds architecture underneath the hood. So if you have the SRD loaded, you can pretty much build what you want. It just takes a while, and you have to learn how to build the content properly. But if you don't want to do all that extra work, and you do have the physical copies, you're a little bit hesitant about rebuying everything, I would just get the player's handbook and go from there. Because with that, you can pretty much do whatever you need to do. Everything else is kind of gravy. And I would say that's kind of true of all the rule sets. If you have the core book and you don't want to go out and buy all the settings and all the extras, once you learn how to use Fantasy Grounds, you can actually enter that data yourself. But for rule books, I recommend at least having the core rule books. That makes it so much easier. Entering a adventure is not as difficult as entering a rule book. So I'm just kind of giving you a heads up on that. So now that I have the library view kind of explained a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and close it. But before I do, I want to make sure that I change the mode that I'm in. So I'm going to go to all just for the sake of this tutorial, and that'll bring all these different banners up. And I'm going to close the library window. Now, one of the things that people struggle with the most, other than loading up things in the library and organizing, is the Windows management. So I'm going to go through that a little so that you can see what I'm talking about. And as this tutorial goes forward, I will show you some tricks and things to keep things straight. This is quite often a problem that most people that use Fantasy Grounds runs into. So if we have any questions, I will move on, Lady Shel.
No questions yet.
Okay. So the first thing I usually do is I'll turn on the dice tower. Now, by default, when you roll a die of any sort, it's usually hidden. You don't have to have the dice tower showing on your side, but if you want to use it like the players are, and you want to see kind of what it looks like for them, you can actually have it show up. But if that's the case, you can no longer drop it in the chat window. All hidden rolls will have to go into the dice tower. So if you come up to the top right where it says options, there is a gear cog. Once you open the gear cog, you'll have your options menu. I will not go through all these options, but as we need them, I'll show you what they do if it comes up. So in this case, we are going to turn on the dice tower. So that is in this first part of the module under Game GM. And it says Table Dice Tower. If you turn that on, that turns it on for your players. So whenever they need to make a hidden roll for you, and only you want to see the results, you will tell them to turn that on, and the little dice tower will appear on the bottom right corner. However, if you also want to use the dice tower like your players are, you go to Chat, Show All Whispers to GM. If you turn that on and you have on the Table Dice Tower, all your hidden rolls will default to the dice tower. If you don't have table dice tower on, all your rolls will be in the open. So you have to be careful with your settings. So if you turn on the chat show GM rolls on, the dice tower appears. It usually appears on the bottom right corner. I had it already kind of moved over, so that's why it appeared there. But I'm going to go ahead and size the window to match up where the dice tower is, and you do that by unlocking it. So you can right click and you click on this little lock, and that'll allow you to change the positioning. And once you have it set, then you can right click on the dice tower, lock it, and right click on the chat window and lock it as well. You always want to leave a little space up here on the top, because when your players connect, they need that room up there. So I'm going to unlock it again and make a little bit more room. So you manipulate this window from the bottom right corner. And I'm going to make it smaller. I'm going to drag this down because I don't need a big, 6-inch chat window. I just need, this little space here. And once I have that on, then I will start opening other windows, and I'll make sure I leave room for my players. So my first step is to resize the chat window and position the dice tower if you're going to use that. And then I'll lock them into place so that they can't be moved. As far as I know, other than the modifiers box, these are the only things that can be locked. Everything else is free floating. So I'm going to go ahead and close the options window for now. And I'm going to go up to the top right, and I'm going to bring up the combat tracker. So this is an important tool that you will be using throughout your campaigns. In all different rule sets, it is very similar. It doesn't function exactly the same way, but it's very close. Looks like I already had a working party here. So I want to clear this information. I don't want these characters on here right now. So what I'm going to do is come down to the menu, and I click on this trash can, and it'll let me delete foes or non-friendlies. But in this case, all these guys are friendly. So what you'll want to do is right-click and delete, and you'll end up deleting one at a time. However, if you want to save time, if you temporarily change their faction to one of the non-friendlies, then you can go to the menu, click on Delete from Tracker, and click on Delete All Non-Friendly, and it gets rid of all of them. So you temporarily change their faction so that that filter or that tool will work, and it makes it much quicker to clear everything. Now, I wouldn't recommend that during gameplay or when you're trying to run a campaign. That's not something you want to do. But when you're just showing things or working things out, and you need to clear it right away, that's the way to do it. So now I'm going to stretch the combat tracker down a little bit, and this is the room that I have now for combatants, NPCs, players, traps, vehicles, whatever it is. They're all going to be lined up in this combat tracker. So that's the next step, is I actually get this combat tracker sized. The next step is to know where the party sheet is. So I have the party sheet. And again, I have all these players on here, but these ones you actually have to right-click and delete if you have something on there you don't want, or you need to change some things around. That is basically how you would remove those. And now I have a clean slate here. So what I'm going to do is start loading up my module and getting that going. But I wanted you to be aware of where these main pieces are. So you have your chat window, your combat tracker, and your party sheet, and your library, and your assets. So these are your main things that you need to use to function. Once you understand where these are and what they do, this stuff gets a little easier. So I'm going to go ahead and close the party sheet temporarily. Now, very important, please remember this because it is very, very important. When you open a window and you want it to be available to you, first thing you want to do is size it. Now, you're not always going to know exactly what size you want it at first, but over time you will. Once you know what that is, size your window, put it where you want it to show up. In this case, I am going to put it up here. To make it a little bit more convenient, instead of always clicking up here in the top right, I'm going to actually drag the shortcut up here, or this little square, down to the hotkeys. So what that does is when I move this around and I get it to a position that I want to keep it at, I'll close it when I don't need it. And when I do need it, it'll open where I left it. Same thing with the combat tracker. If for some reason I need the space that's behind it, maybe I need to show something or I want to keep something over there, whatever the reason might be, instead of moving this over, you want to leave it where it's at and dismiss it with the buttons up on top or by Xing out. So if I click on the combat tracker again, it'll disappear. If I click on it again, it'll reappear. And it's going to leave it where you left it last. So if you end up moving this over or putting this over here and then dismissing it, and then you go, oh, I need the combat tracker, it's not going to go where you want it. You're going to have to end up moving it back. So keep your windows where you want them placed and dismiss them. Don't move them. That's the key. Don't move the windows unless you have to. Keep them where they're at, keep them positioned, and close them instead of moving them out of the way. And that is based off of experience. That's based off of some really good points that I got in the very beginning of my journey with Fantasy Grounds, and that is what I teach. So please remember not to move your windows. Get them sized to where they're comfortable for you. Now, in some cases, you guys will not have the same amount of desktop space. That all has to do with the resolution of your screen and how you have your Fantasy Grounds set up. I'm not going to cover that technical data at this point, but if you're running out of room on your desktop and you don't have as much space as I do, more than likely you need to scale your user interface. And there's a couple ways to do that. There's a command, and then there's a way to do it in your settings before you log into Fantasy Grounds. And I would scale it to about 85 or 90 and go from there. That'll give you a little bit more room, but at the expense of having your fonts being too small to read. So the more you shrink this thing down to get more room, the smaller your text is going to be. So you have to find a fine balance between those two. So the next thing is to bring up the actual data that we're going to be running. So in this case, there are different groups, and this is Lady Shel's favorite part. So what do we call this, Lady Shel?
The robot.
The robot. All right, so what she's talking about is this is just a way that I display how the data is related and where it is. So this data would be included from your library. So this includes both Lost Mine and the Player's Handbook. So to show you how the Fantasy Grounds organizes and how it works, I'm going to lay it out so that you have an idea of what things are. So the first thing I look at here is the maps and images. So this is the main visual aspect of Fantasy Grounds. This is where your NPCs, your handouts, and your maps will be stored. And these are stored in either your campaign folder, which is in your assets, and your assets folder has different groups. So you have tokens, you have portraits, you have images, and all. You go to images, which is where this is stored, and you find the name of this campaign. In this case, I would call this Fantasy Grounds A to Z. So I need to find that folder because that's the actual campaign folder. Or if you go back to the beginning of this menu, there is a folder called campaign, and then there is a data folder. So the data folder is basically the base folder for images. So in other words, if you want the images that you have for your campaign setting in the top level data folder, that means those images and tokens and whatever else you have will be available in any campaign that you play. If you only want certain tokens and certain assets and certain maps to show up, then they need to go into the campaign folder, which is a subfolder of your campaigns folder. So this is in the back end of Fantasy Grounds. So this particular session or campaign that I'm in is called Fantasy Grounds A to Z. So I would have to go through here and look for the letter F because it's alphanumeric. And if I look through here and I'm in images, I should be able to find a folder that is aptly named. And this is where I would add anything that would be pertaining to this particular session or campaign in this case. So I probably should have named it better, but I have a lot of FG things in here. I have portals and locations and all these different things.
Why don't you search for it?
Well, if you search for it and you have this much content, it will potentially take it a couple minutes to go through that. So I would much rather just go straight to the folder than trying to search for it. So I have a different packs here that are in my content here. But if I go to the FGC DM course material and I open this up, it will bring up the maps for the course material. But if you want the actual campaign, you're going to have to go through and find the correct folder. And the reason this is difficult is because I have 50,000 assets. So if you have this much stuff, please consider reorganizing and basically taking your content and shaving it down. I have to go through this again and actually maintain and manage this because it becomes a mess. And if you have this many assets and you use the search function, it's going to take it 5 minutes to go through all that stuff. So you want to be careful with that search if you have a lot of content. It'll lock Fantasy Grounds up for a couple minutes if you have a ton of materials. So you have to be careful with that. But it still works. You just have to let it think and do its thing. So if you're in the middle of a class like I am, you don't want to be doing that right away. You also have a folder down here on the bottom. And I don't know if this will show up, but if you click on the folder, it opens up a dialog window. And in there, it shows my campaign folder under Fantasy Grounds, and it says FGU A to C or A to Z series. So if I have any images that I want to add or any custom items, that is where I would put them. In this case, I'm going to stick a map in there, and I'm just going to leave it there for now. And later on in this series, I will show you where to find that. So for right now, I just added a map, which is going to be part of this this section or the segment of our teachings. And then when you come back in here, you want to hit this refresh folder asset buttons. And what will happen is if you have anything in here, it will refresh your view of your campaign folder or of your main view for your images. So technically, I should be able to go back into the first part of this segment and open up the campaign folder, which is attached to this specific session. So now I have a campaign folder. Now that there's content in it and I hit refresh, now I have a shortcut straight to the content. And what I added was a map. And if I double click on it, it should give me a preview window. And that is what you want. So this is a preview image. So I will show you how to add this later, but this is where the item is stored. So if you're going to add images, you first add them to either your top level or your campaign folder. Then you hit the refresh folder assets button, and your campaign folder should show up within your library. And that's what you're looking for. Once that happens, then you can access whatever content that you've loaded. You can even make subfolders to help organize this. So if you want maps in one, and you want handouts in another, and you want like NPCs in another, that would be handy. Tokens would have their own folder, and portraits would have their own folder. So if you add custom portraits or tokens, they too would have their own folder within your campaign or data folder. So the maps and images is the first part of this. The next is the story. This is the heart of everything. This is where everything is stored. So before you jump into anything, most things are linked to the story entry depending on what you have loaded for content. Also, you have your NPCs, which is your non-playing character, and your monsters, and any of your little sidekicks or whatever you have in there. It'd also be traps and vehicles. So this is your NPC area. That's where all those are stored. Now the next thing is encounters. Encounters are linked basically to NPCs. So you build encounters with NPCs. So these two are kind of go hand in hand. The next is items. So your items is everything like your equipment, weapons, clothing, services, treasures, anything like that is going to be an item. And then you have parcels. So what parcels are basically groups of treasure and coins. So coins are managed on your character sheets, and they're also managed through parcels. Coins are not normally an item unless you value a pile of coins and give it a certain number. But for the most part, coins are just numerical reference. So when you have a parcel, it may have coins, it may have items, it might have both, but parcels is where it's stored as far as a treasure item. So if you want to give out coins, or you want to give out treasure, or both, they are stored in a parcel format instead of individual items. So parcels are kind of like encounters, they're kind of groups of things. And they can't have one single item in it, or just coins, or just one monster. But they are how you group and organize different things to be able to award them on your party sheet. So when you're playing throughout your adventure, I'm going to click on my shortcut. There's my party sheet. If I have a parcel to give out on the XP tab, this is where I would award that. So if I had the cave entrance and I wanted to award that to my group, you drag that in here, and it will show up as an item to award. Same thing with encounters. But I have to put party members on the party sheet first, so I will show that later. So there we have those different aspects. And now we have tables. Tables is for your variety and for your randomness. And sometimes they can make your module replayability higher because it won't always turn out the same if you set up stories through the tables. The other is the quest items, which are your milestones or goals. And this is a different way to reward experience points using the party sheet. So again, in this party sheet, you have two groups here, one for encounters, one for quests. So whenever you do or complete or defeat an enemy, those particular groupings get set in here. And when they've passed the event or it's doing well, your encounters and your quest items will go into this area, and then your parcels will go to the inventory section and be rewarded through there. You have a way to manage your items and coins, and then you have a way to manage your encounters and your quests. So remember, quest items are just like milestones or goals. I give out unrelated items. So if you come to the table and you're on time, I'll give you 50 experience points or 25 or something like that. And that way, after times, maybe people will start coming to the table on time and showing up. But I use that as a way to award my players also. So there's ways to use the quest items other than just a story element. So that's the party sheet. I will get into it more, but this is where you award those things. So this is for encounters, and the quest items are for the quests. And then on this tab for inventory, that's where the parcels are awarded. So these are just basically groupings for XP and for encounters, for monsters and such, treasure. These make it a lot more convenient than handling things on an individual level. So if you have a group of treasure, all the value gets put into this party sheet. You can sell items, that sort of thing. If you have a milestone where you have to split 1,000 experience between your party members, that's what the quest item's for. And then if you have an encounter where you have to fight or defeat or make someone run away, or however you end up using it, you will get an encounter award, which is based more off of dialogue, parlay, disabling traps, destroying vehicles, or maybe even commandeering a vehicle. So that is how you would basically get experience points for those. So this is our robot. You have the head, the body, the 2 legs, the arms and the hands here. So if you can remember this, that's why I use this visual tool. You will pretty much remember where everything is stored and how it's related. So if you need to take a screenshot of this, it'd be a good time for that. I'll actually arrange it so you can read them. So these are your main groupings here. Now this does not include the character stuff. So technically, if I go to the library and I change it to Game Master, this is the stuff we're talking about, not the character creation stuff. So this is the main grouping and how this is set up. So now I'm going to start closing some of these out. But before I do that, I want to explain how this stuff is grouped together. So you have a group here under all. And what that does is it displays everything that you have loaded in your library. So if you want that to go away and you only want to see Lost Mine of Phandelver, you will take each one of these groups and filter it to the specific area or the section that you want to be in. So I've just filtered this NPCs to the NPCs in the module. The encounters are broken up into chapters or groups. So I'll just go with chapter 1. Quests, same thing. Lost Mine of Phandelver quests. The tables, same thing, but they don't come up till chapter 3. But I'll go ahead and filter it anyways. For the story, you want to probably start with the basic one, but you can start at chapter 1 if you want. And then for parcels, same thing. These are the treasure items that you'll give out in the module. Your items are broken up into 2 groups. You have one for magic items and then one standard stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and break this down to a standard set. And then when you come to your group up here, you have your artwork for Lost Mines. There's maps here. There's NPC. So it depends on the data that you need. They've broken it up into categories. I personally would have it in one group so I don't have to filter these out. But nonetheless, so I don't have to go into 5 different groups. But there's a lot of stuff in there. So there's maps, there's images, there's handouts, there's NPCs. You can do that by naming your items. So you could put NPC, comma, whatever the name is, map, comma, whatever the name is. So then when you go down this list, it's organized by the title instead of making them into separate groups. The only reason you would group it that way is because of the amount of data. So if you have a ton of data, you might have to break it up. So that is basically how Lost Mines is grouped and set up. So I'm going to go to the map section here. So here's the maps for Lost Mines of Phandelver. and here's all your grouping. So the way they did it is they put this title here so you know what the player map is and what the DM map is. So here you have a shareable low resolution map that you could share with your players. And to share an image like this, you right click on it and you'd share this with this icon over here. It's on the left, on the top left corner. It says sharing. Once you click on that, it becomes, and you click share record, it now becomes a shared asset. So this little P next to it means that it's public. That means that your party members have access to this map now. They cannot see any of these red pins, but they can see the map. So if that's what your intentions are, that's what you would do. And that sharing image thing works for all things. So you just right click on the item itself and then right click on the shortcut on the top left corner of whatever you're trying to share. So here's the ruins of Thunder Tree. If you were going to share this with your players, you would right click on it, click sharing, and then you click share record. And on the bottom left, you would see a status where it would show you which players are viewing the map or have it loaded. So that is how you would dig through here and find your maps that you want to share. Now, when you actually run this adventure, which we will get more into on our next episode, we'll actually run the encounters and such. I got to keep this short, so I want to just give you an idea of in case that you don't have a map. So in this adventure, when you dig into it, you're going to find that you're not going to have a map for this first goblin encounter. That was by design. Wizards of the Coast and the publishers thought it would be a good idea to write this chapter for Theater of the Mind. They wanted you to run it inside of your head or, maybe use graph paper or whatever you need to do to keep track of it. So that's one way to handle the first encounter, is where the goblins come out on either side of the map and they attack you. Or, and when I say the map, that's assuming that you have brought in a map or that you have found a way to do that. Or you can just load the encounter in the combat tracker and run the whole thing in there. And on your party sheet, you can share the tab that says order. So if you go into your settings on options, you have the option to share two of these tabs. The inventory tab, so that's show inventory to clients, and then you have the order tab, which is show characters to clients. So this is where you could use this as a tool to show what's happening in the battle. So if I click on this, I'm going to actually delete these tokens. I right clicked on the map and then or a token, and then I click on delete this token or delete all. So I'm going to delete all of them. And then if you have a drawing already, I'm going to go into the drawing mode. And then you can actually enter the drawing mode. You can lock the layer or you can clear it. So I'm going to clear the drawing. And this is actually a pointer. It's a circle that shows radius. So if I right click on it and I click pointers, I can actually remove all pointers or just this one. So I'll just do all just in case. And now I have a blank slate. Normally when you start up, you don't have a grid. If you need a grid, you would right click on it, click on layers, and you would turn the grid on. By default, when you first start, it's off. So again, I'll right click on this party sheet in the marching and formation area, click on layers and set grid, and then you just left click and drag until you get the grid size you want. So you could totally use this as a way to illustrate the battle if you're just going to run it through the combat tracker and you need a little reference for yourself. Or you can also share it with the party if you need to. So this is just like playing on pen and paper. You have some graph paper, you have your descriptions, and you just run the battle off the combat tracker. So that is basically how these groups work together. And now we're starting to get into how to set up your campaign. So we will do that. We'll continue this for another show. We'll have a part 2 to this where we're actually going to get into deeper on how to run it and how to organize it and get more into that aspect of it. But this is just showing you how to organize it. So the next thing is I'm going to actually decide I want to put a map in this particular campaign. I don't want to run Theater of the Mind. I don't want to use that method I just showed you for using the party sheet. I actually want a nice map. So in order to do that, I'd have to go back to my assets area. And I showed you earlier where the campaign data was. So I have to go to images first. Because it defaults to tokens, I'm going to make a request that it defaults to images. And then I will take and double click this campaign folder. And this should contain the map that I chose to supplement or to use in this campaign. So I'll double click on here. And it should pop up the preview window, which it has. Now from this preview window, I can choose where I want to add this. In this case, I want to just add it into the campaign notes under the group for the maps. So if I click Create Image Record from Asset, it'll actually open the map up. This map is rather big. So all I'm doing is resizing this particular window, and that's important that you do this. So I'm grabbing the bottom right corner and I'm holding down the right control key and I'm manipulating this bottom right corner, which allows me to get this a little bit more into shape as to, how big I want it to be. And then I'm going to run it over here on the top right corner. So once I have it roughly the size I want it, you can click on the map and zoom in and out if you need to. But this is the maximum size that it's going to display in the Fantasy Grounds window in the desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this. And this is probably as large as I can let this be. I might shrink it a little bit more. So all I'm doing right now is kind of getting a rough idea of where I'm going to put this window when I start running the campaign. So I think right there is good. And then if you click inside there on the map and use your mouse wheel, you can scroll in and out. Now the next step on any map that you're going to be using is you would add a grid. So for today, I'm only going to add the grid. In the next episode, we'll get into other details. So this is the grid, which is on the far right. This did not come with a grid, which is good because I can then put my grid anywhere I want. However, if this had a grid on it painted, I would have to try to line these up. So if you're out there grabbing maps, try to make sure you get the ones without a grid if you can help it. That saves you a lot of headache. So I'm going to go ahead and click on grid. And right now it's set to 50 by 50. I think that's a little small. So I'm going to go to 60 by 60. And if you zoom in, you'll see that that might even be a little bit too small. So I'm going to go with 100. And that's why it's kind of important.
Doesn't he make his maps for 100 by 100?
Yes, but that's only if you know. A lot of people don't know what that is.
Oh, okay.
So what she's saying is, why don't you base it off of the resolution or the pixels per inch? That's only if you know what they are. If you don't know, you're going to have to play around with it till it looks right. And that's what I was trying to show. Now you can see this grid's a little bit obnoxious. So you can actually change the color and the grid type if you want, or the visibility of it. So even though the grid's gone, it's still there. In this case, I'm going to bring it back. But if you click on the color wheel, the color picker, and you click this on this A where it says alpha, you can actually fade it out a little bit so it's not as obnoxious. And you can change the color. So if you wanted to go with a little bit more definition, or maybe you want this green instead, and then turn down the alpha a little bit more, which is the transparency. Now you have more of a subtle light green kind of grid. and it's not as bright. And that's all you have to do really to get the map started. I'm not worried about line of sight and all that stuff right now. All I'm doing is gridding the map. Once I have the map in position and I have the grid on it, I'm going to lock it on the top right here. And that'll lock it into place so I don't accidentally move the map around. So now I have it in position. Now, as you're playing, the bigger your maps are, the more scrolling. So if you want to avoid doing this all day long, you want to keep your maps as small as you can. And you want to zoom in to a certain point, but not too close, not too far away. You'll get a feel for it after a while, but it can be very annoying. So if you're constantly having to do that, that probably means your map's too big or it's irregular. So in order to help combat that and to recenter the map easier, you have this little tool here. It's a drop down, this toggle toolbar, and it has a zoom to fit button. So if you're like this and you're all the way in here or way over here, you can click on that and it'll recenter the map for you so you can zoom in. Or you can right click on the map, click view, and you can go zoom to fit or zoom to fill. Zoom to fill tries to fill every last square inch of space, viewable space. Zoom to fit will actually place it in regard to the dimensions. So that's all you need to know right off the bat for a map. So you just slap a grid on it, adjust it the way you want it, and call it good. Now it says Goblin Ambush up here. So what I'm going to do is put map in front of it with a comma so I know what it is. On the left, I'm just going to say Triboard Trail. Shel, why would I do this?
So that you can hide that it's an ambush, so people just know that they're on the Triboard Trail and they don't know that they're going to be ambushed by goblins.
That's right. So if you're going to steal or borrow a map, I would mask it or change the description. And then click on the center button up here in the very center of the two titles. And what that does is that when you present this map, and I'm going to go ahead and lock it, when you present this map to your players, and you right click on it, hit sharing, and then share record, it's only going to show this title, the Triboard Trail. It's going to block the actual name of the file. So that way they know that this is a map, but they're not going to necessarily see the title, Boss Lair, or in this case, Goblin Ambush. Or maybe it says Miss Calendar Girl 2020, whatever. You don't want it to, they don't want to see that. You want them to see the actual name you'd like it to be. So make sure that the map is titled correctly, and if it's not, you have the option to change it and even to mask it so you have a new unique title. So that is basically how this works. There is some line of sight things and shadowing and effects that we could show you later. But in this case, I got to keep it short, so we'll just leave it at that. So now this goblin map, the ambush, is a player public asset. If you want to unshare these files, you click on the little letter P. And what that does is it cuts down on the bandwidth and the amount of memory that you need. Even though Fantasy Grounds can handle, or Fantasy Grounds Unity can handle more larger file size locally, when you try to set something over to your players, that's over 100 megs. That's 100 megabytes per second that has to be pushed over. And what happens is if you go anything over that, it starts to bog down and it delays the loading time and it starts lagging. So even if you have the best computer and the fastest internet, it's really not going to help with bandwidth, because bandwidth comes down to your provider, your equipment, and the architecture of how the internet works. So be careful with that. Also, wireless connections can be problematic with that. So just keep that kind of thing in mind. So nonetheless, here are the different groupings and these are how they're laid out and grouped. So keep that in mind. And the next episode that we do, we will take all this information. We will set up our encounters, our session 1, our session 0, and then we'll run a little combat. So if there's no other questions, Shel, I think we'll call it a day.
Yeah, I don't see any questions. Does
Okay.
anybody have any questions? Speak up now or hold your peace or whatever.
So we have a module that we created together. Do you want to tell us about that a little bit while I start setting this up for next time?
Sure. I just had to grab the link.
Okay.
Laerun and I just worked on a module that is a module that can be a companion module to if you were running Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden, but it can be used with any setting that is in a Arctic area because it is based in an Arctic area. It is going to be the location of our wilderness outfitter is approximately 20 miles southeast of East Haven, which is one of the towns in 10 towns. So if you were not going to be using the Forgotten Realms for your campaign, you would have to change anywhere where we have mentioned that in there. Basically what this is it's a location that you can purchase supplies, interact with our NPCs, and just, you know, have an interesting game stuff with it. We're giving you items and parcels and just an interactive store where your players can purchase what they want and just drag it into their inventory, and it will deduct the gold or copper or silver, whatever the price is. And yeah, that's some fun stuff that we did. It is called Merle T. Jack's Wilderness Outfitter, and we also have backstories for each of the people that work at Merle T. Jack's, and so you know who they are and how they interact with each other. And I'll put a link in our chat if you want to take a look at it on the DMs Guild. We just listed it. It's $5.99. So you know, check it out. See if it's something that might work for you.
Yes, AP 777-200, thanks for watching. Hopefully these help you. I'm trying to keep these down to an hour or less, so we're running out of time. But if you guys want to learn more, come on over to the college. We run classes as much as we can. It's a little sparse right now due to the holidays, but we do run classes daily and weekly, and we hope to see you there. So, Lady, can you please put in a link to our community?
There, just link to the Discord.
All right. So do you have anything else before we go? Anything else?
Let me just also put a link to our website where you can create your account on the website.
Yep. So make sure your Discord name or your community name matches your website account. So make your account in Fantasy Grounds College first, and then go to the website and register there. A lot of people will register on the website, come back, and their names don't match, and that's problematic for us. So I think we're good. I think we should call it a day. So the next episode in a couple weeks, we will go over this exact data, but we'll set it up for an actual campaign or adventure and run a little combat so you guys understand how it goes together. Okay.
Yeah, our next stream will be on the 20th, and again that will be at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We hope that you like the new time and that you'll tell your friends about our stream if they are interested in Fantasy Grounds Unity. And also, we have a playlist that has all of our previous episodes, and it will include this one sometime today. And we thank you for coming by and watching, and we hope to see you on the Discord soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.